Hey everybody! Today we're going to be talking about section 5.5, which is about irrigation. I know we briefly touched on this with our 5.3 notes on the Green Revolution, but we'll just be going more in depth into it with these notes. So the learning objective for today is that you can describe different methods of irrigation and also that you can describe the benefits and drawbacks of these different methods. Now we have clearly a ton of essential knowledge that you're going to gain from these notes. Basically, all of this is going to relate to the different types of methods that we can use for irrigation and where this water comes from, some of the benefits of using it, and then some of the drawbacks and things that can occur with these methods. So we're going to start with three different common methods. And the first one is going to be the furrow irrigation. This is where you dig a trench along the crops and you fill it with water. Now, this is really easy and inexpensive, and water is going to seep into the soil slowly. However, the problem is that it is only about 66% efficient when it comes to the water usage because you lose about 33% of it to runoff and evaporation. The next one is going to be drip irrigation, and this is actually like the best type here, but it is also more costly. So it's over 95% efficient. This is where you have a hose with holes in it, so it allows the water to just kind of slowly drip out. This avoids waterlogging the soil, and it also conserves water, but it's very expensive, especially like imagine if you use this for a massive cornfield, pretty costly. The next is going to be flood irrigation, and this is where you are going to just flood an entire field. It's easier, but it's more disruptive to plants, which means there's only really a few plants you can do this with. Think of like cranberries or rice. And another problem is it can waterlog the soil and drown the plants because the roots get waterlogged. So that is a downside that can happen. However, this is decently efficient. It is going to be about 80% efficiency, where you're going to lose 20% to runoff and evaporation. And then we have spray irrigation. And this is going to be where you have ground or surface water pumped into spray nozzles. This is going to be more efficient because you're going to have less water loss than like the furrow or flood systems. However, it is also more expensive because it requires energy for the pumps and movements of sprinklers. So it's going to require electricity in order to be working. So these are going to be like the four most common methods that we tend to see. So we are going to talk about waterlogging since it can be a common problem that can happen. This is going to be where you are overwatering and it leads to saturation of the soil. It fills all of the soil pore space with water. So if you look at this picture on the left is where it's unsaturated. You've got some water contained in there, but ultimately some of the pores are going to have gas in it, air, and it's going to have some space. With saturated soil, it just fills up all of the pores. And so there's not really any option for the roots to dry out, and they are going to potentially drown. So one of the problems additionally is that when you don't have this air being able to get into the pores, the roots aren't able to take in oxygen, which plants need oxygen in order to do cellular respiration to survive. So it's a problem when they can't get it. This is ultimately going to lead to stunted growth or killing crops. Or it also leads to killed houseplants. If you've ever overwatered a houseplant, this is why it dies. I've unfortunately done that many times. So the solution to waterlogging is going to be using drip irrigation or soil aeration. And this is what soil aeration is going to be. You can either take a pitchfork or you've got little aerating tools that go in and actually poke holes or cores in the soil, and it allows air to get in and water to drain through the soil. So this is basically what it does. If you've got shallow roots that are compacted, you put in these little holes and it's going to aerate it. So you're able to get that air in there. You're able to get water like going through better, which is ultimately going to lead to deeper roots and new root growth, which is going to ultimately be good for the plants, but also good for soil when you think about the ability of the soil to not be, oh my gosh, what is the word that I'm looking for? Erosion. Oh my gosh. So when you have more root growth, this leads to less soil erosion. So it's good all around. Now, soil salinization is something that can happen, and this is going to be the process of salt building up in the soil over time, which when you get too much soil, that's going to be bad. The plants will not be able to survive that. So groundwater is typically what is used for irrigation, and groundwater just naturally has small amounts of salt in it. So if you're going to be watering with the groundwater, that water is going to evaporate, and when it evaporates, the salt is left behind in the soil. So over time, it's going to, keep evaporating and leaving soil behind. So eventually it gets to toxic levels, which is going to dehydrate plant roots and prevent growth. And a solution to this is using drip irrigation, doing soil aeration. You can also just flush it with fresh water, kind of run some of that salt out, or get it deeper into the soil where the roots aren't actually at that level. Or you can switch your freshwater source. So if you get it from a lake or a river or a stream, that's not going to have the salt that naturally groundwater has in it. And so that's going to be better for soil salinization prevention. So if we're going to look at the global human water use, this is important to look at, this graph here. We've got 3 different types of human water use. Sorry, my puppy's at my feet and she's going crazy right now. We have industrial. This is going to be used for power plants, metal or plastic manufacturing. This uses up about 19% of our total water usage. Then we have municipal, which is household stuff like what you use for toilets, showers, drinking water. This uses up 11%. Then we have agriculture. This is going to be water for livestock or irrigation water for crops. And this makes up 70% of our water usage, which is clearly a lot. So it's kind of important to keep in mind when you talk about the individual choices that you can make, or that corporations can make, or as a society we can make when it comes to water usage. All of your individual choices do matter, like not taking long showers, not flushing your toilet as much, stuff like that. But keep in mind, in the scope of things, agriculture is the massive one. So this is where if we can not be needing as much water for our agricultural practices, that's going to have a pretty significant impact when we look at how it's distributed here. So we're going to look at this aquifers and groundwater. So groundwater is going to be water that's stored in pore space of permeable rock and sediment layers. So as it rains, you're going to have it soak in, and that groundwater is going to be kind of where that is held in those pores at that rock layer, which is a bit deeper down. Then we have aquifers. These are going to be usable groundwater deposits that humans can use. And we're going to have a couple different types, but they're ultimately going to be replenished by groundwater recharge, which is where you have rainwater going through, down percolating through the soil into the aquifer. So we've got 2 of them. The first one is going to be unconfined aquifers. They tend to be a little bit nearer to the surface. They aren't fully confined necessarily in the deep recesses of the soil. And so these are going to potentially be more contaminated or have more potential for contamination. Then we have confined aquifers. In confined aquifers, they are less contaminated. However, they recharge slowly. So when you're looking at water usage, obviously confined is going to feel a bit more safe potentially and more usable, but they recharge more slowly. So when they're used for drinking water, we can deplete them faster than they can be recharged, which is going to be concerning when you have a lot of people depending on a certain aquifer when it eventually runs out potentially. So with this depletion of aquifers, there's kind of a couple ways that this can look. And the first one is called the cone of depression. Basically, depression as in something that gets pushed down and depressed, not necessarily in like the sadness, but I guess it's kind of sad when this happens too. So the cone of depression forms when the water table is lowered by excessive pumping, depleting water, and drying nearby wells. So if you look at this right here, houses that are on wells, which happen a lot in rural areas, they are going to be going down into this water table. And so when you have the water table being depleted from like those wells or in a specific area, you are going to have in that specific spot is where it comes down, kind of makes this cone here. And other wells that are nearby, all of a sudden they aren't going to be touching water anymore and they're going to be depleted, which if your house needs a well for water, that's going to be a problem. What we also have is called saltwater intrusion. And this is where you have an excessive pumping near the coast to where it lowers the water table pressure, which allows salt water to seep into groundwater, which if it's salty, you can no longer drink it, which is a problem. So this is going to be happening in areas near like coastal where you have the salt water nearby. But that's going to be another thing that can happen when aquifers are depleted. So this is going to be your practice FRQ 5.5. I want you to describe how soil salinization occurs. I want you to propose a solution to prevent or remediate soil salinization. And then I want you to identify one disadvantage of the solution that you propose. So there's 3 parts there. And this is going to be giving you practice with the suggested skill of describing disadvantages, advantages, or unintended consequences for potential solutions. So that's your 5.5 FRQ. Those were your notes on 5.5, and hopefully it was helpful.